And this sketch is actually in perspective view, which is a little bit more difficult to work on um, than an orthographic view. But I want to talk a little bit about how to work with this kind of stuff, right? When somebody hands you something like this and you don't have a perfect orthographic view. I'm trying to, if you don't watch these videos very often, or if this is the first one that you've seen, this is a little bit different than most software demos, right? This is a very loose conversation between you and I. It's intended to be interactive. I'd expect you to hit the chat and ask questions. Interrupt me if you see something that you get lost with or anything like that. Um, and so what I like to do is we take something like this and try and start a build, try to pull it off in about an hour, hour and a half. If it gets crazy, we can back it up and split it into two pieces or something like that. But I think we can pull this off in about an hour. So, but I want to talk a little bit about how to approach something like this. And I see a couple questions coming in. My interface does not look like what you have on screen and the commands are not placed where they are. How do I get a screen like this? You go to Rhino Preferences, go to Themes down here, and I'm set up with the Rhino for Windows theme. There's a Rhino for Mac, Rhino for Windows, and a custom. I use the Rhino for Windows just because I go back and forth. It makes it easier for me. How do I get the picture on the screen? Use the picture command and try to use less of the typed commands. As a beginner, it's hard to remember them. Thank you. I will try to do that. So what I try to do with these is either the night before or the morning of, I try to do a little scruffy sketch and have a little conversation with myself about what it is that I want to build. And I try to put myself in the position that you are in, where you're sitting in your office or at your home, or actually, I guess everybody's at home right now, and somebody sends you a sketch and says, build this. And you've never seen it before, you've never built it before, and you have to try and figure out how to be amazing, right now. So I put myself in the same position. I don't practice these, which you'll see as we go into the video. Or if you've watched a lot of my videos, you can tell that they are not practiced. And we're just gonna start. We're gonna talk about how we go from clean sheet to a model. If we run into problems, we're gonna stop and fix them. If something breaks, we're gonna try and figure out how to unbreak it. And if we run into problems, I'm going to stop and talk about it. If Rhino has a problem, we're going to talk about that. I might make some notes. If we find some bugs, we're going to do that. It's a very different type of webinar than you'll typically see with a software company. So this is where we like to turn the stage around and let everybody see what's going on behind the scenes, and be completely transparent about what it takes to go from a sketch to a model, hopefully in about an hour, hour and a half. So this model, when I first started looking at it, I had a little conversation with myself about what it was going to take to build this thing. And I don't know if you can see my notes here, but the front wheel, clearly this is going to be a revolve. And I tend to do this when I see things, right, in stores and stuff. I'll say, how's this made? And I'll go, oh, this is a 2-rail sweep. This is a revolve. This is a blend surface. This is a this. This is a that. And I try to do that. So I did this with this, and I basically am looking at, like, this is a main revolve surface. This is kind of this pedal is kind of a primitive. This handle would be a revolve, the wheels would be a revolve. The deck here is probably going to be one surface for the top deck, one surface for the bottom deck, and then some sort of either a blend surface or a 2-rail sweep to make the middle. This detail is probably going to be a split with a couple of blend surfaces. This back seat is probably going to be 2 surfaces with a blend. And so I kind of go through that and think about what it's going to take in order to pull this off. Then the next thing I have to think about is, how big is this thing? And the only dimension that I know is that this front wheel is about 16 inches in diameter. And so if I was going to be building this for real, I would actually try to get some sort of semblance of scale with this sketch. But in this case, because it's just a demo, I'm not going to worry about the scale. But if I was going to do that, I would probably take a circle. I would do it at 16 inches. and then I would scale the drawing to match so that, so that it makes sense. In fact, we can actually do that. So let's just say that this thing is 16 inches in diameter, and that's going to set the scale for the rest of our model, and we can just shift drag and scale this up so that it matches approximately kind of what we're looking at, right? And this is an oblique drawing, so we have to kind of guesstimate, but this is useful as far as being able to like determine how much, wheelbase and things like that we have. So I'm going to actually not work over this drawing. I'm going to kind of stick it up here and use it as reference, but I'm not actually going to work over it because it's in perspective. It doesn't really do a lot of good as far as trying to figure out exactly how to build this thing in side view. Question, where's the picture command? I just typed it. Just type picture, and that will give you the file browser in order to be able to do this. So also, don't try and follow along. Don't try and build this with me, because I'm going to start moving really quickly here, and most likely you are not going to be able to keep up, and we don't have time to stop and wait for everybody to keep up. These are recorded. This will be posted on Vimeo and YouTube. So if you do want to do this build, save it and then go from there. There is not an icon for the picture command, as far as I know. I've never actually used it. If there is one, I always just type it in. All right, so the back wheels on this are about 8 inches. So let's do a 8-inch diameter circle, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to slide it back in space, and I'm going to actually just tuck this right on to the x-axis, and I'm going to take this and do the same. I'm going to sit it right on the line there. In fact, we can actually do this precisely if we wanted to by using the move tool. And I'm going to snap it from here to 0. Okay, same thing here. I'm going to move this from here, and I'm going to turn my grid snap on and just drop it right down there. So that way I know it's lined up, and that gives me an approximate, ability to be able to figure out what it is. So now we need to start kind of drafting this thing out and figure out what's going on. I'm going to mark some centers on this, and just using O snap, I'm going to snap a point to the center of these wheels, and then we need to decide, like, is this the right relationship? It looks to me like this wheel is actually bigger. If I were to kind of trace this forward, I would say that this probably is about 3/4 of the size of this thing. So I'm going to actually scale this up, because I don't like the relationship of those two, like that. And then probably pull it back just a hair, kind of somewhere lined up with that center line. Can you create a quick key for the move tool? Yes, you can hotkey anything in Rhino using aliases. If you go Rhino, Preferences, Aliases, you can set up a hotkey for everything in Rhino right here. All right, so let's start laying this out. And what we want to do originally is kind of determine what the fork angle is. So I'm going to kind of just mimic the angle on this thing right in this drawing, right about here. And then we're going to repeat this, and we're going to start drawing what will be the main profile of the deck, something kind of like that. Then we have to decide what the top profile of the deck is, and it's close, but it's not quite exactly the same. So I'm going to tap Alt Option, and I'm going to make a copy as I'm dragging this with Gumball. I'm going to slide this up a little bit farther so it's out of my way. And then I'm going to turn the points on, and I'm going to do just a little bit of point editing in order to get this to be a little bigger And then I'm going to make this a little tighter, just to get a little thick thin in that shape so that it's a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more interesting. But I'm using the same point count. I actually just copied that curve and I'm editing the points, and then that way I get a nice relationship between the two. So we'll do something like that. And then I'm going to actually line up these endpoints a little bit better. Something like that. There we go. And that gives us our two shapes. And we can actually take these and go into perspective view. Actually, it looks like I'm building on the wrong plane. So I'm going to grab everything and I am going to set my gumball. Gumball relocate. I'm going to set my gumball at 0. And I'm actually going to just click and rotate everything 90 degrees. I'm going to do the same thing here. Stick this back up in space, kind of like that. So if I go to my perspective view, then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take these two surfaces and I'm going to just start extruding them, but I'm going to hold down Shift. I'm going to extrude them in 2 directions. And that gives me the first basis of what I'm trying to build, right? So now I need to determine, since the back of this thing is the widest part of it, I need to determine kind of how wide this thing is. And I'm just going to do this visually. I'm going to just drag this and say, I want it to be about that wide. And my wheel, my back wheel, is going to start here and extrude outwards, again, clicking that dot. And then I'm going to mirror this around 0. And that's going to give me kind of my layout, right? That feels kind of big wheelie-ish, right? Is anybody else old enough to remember one of these things? Or is it just me? Am I the oldest guy in the room? Did that just happen? I think that might be the case. Can you do a parallel offset so that the curves would be parallel to each other? Yes, you can. In this case, I didn't want to, but you can do a parallel offset, and offset is right here, offset curve. Okay, and that would be a parallel offset. Now, one thing I will tell you about offset is it makes a little bit ugly. It makes a little ugliness out of the curves. If I make a curve like this and I turn on its points and I offset this curve, look what happens. Let's offset the curve. Let's actually offset the curve. Let's pick the curve and let's actually offset it instead of, I'm going to offset it 2 and I'm not going to cap it. And let's do distance of 2. All right, now let's look at the points on this thing. See that? That's not awesome. All right, so what you would need to do is actually rebuild this curve or redraw it or whatever. This is why I don't use offset very often. I usually copy paste, move, and then edit in order to get my offsets, because if I were to build a surface off of this surface builds quite nicely, right? See, nice and light. This surface, wah wah. See how many points that has? That's not ideal. We don't necessarily want that many points when we can get away with this many points, right? So that's why I as far as offset is concerned, I kind of go light with the offset, but you can use it. I'm not saying don't use it. I'm just saying you need to understand, you know, what exactly you're doing when you do offset it, all right? So let's go to the top view and let's determine kind of what, I'm going to extrude this using Shift. And the front wheel on these things was not super wide, but let's give it a little stance, give it a little chonk to it right there. So that kind of gets us started. And then let's go to the top view and let's say, okay, we need enough room for our forks. So let's go rectangle center and let's make it rounded. And I'm going to snap this in the center and just kind of figure out like how wide does the head on this thing need to be? And I'm going to say it needs to be about that wide, because that's going to give us enough room to do our forks and stuff. And what that'll do is that'll give me a starting reference as far as like where I'm going to start drawing this next curve. So I'm going to start drawing this next curve. I'm going to snap and pull a guide out here, and then I'm going to start drawing, and I'm going to just pull this back like this. Now, one thing I want to point out is you will notice every time you see me make a corner with a curve, all right, this is especially for you new folks out there, 3 points makes a corner. So this is my lead in, right? 1, 2, 3, lead out. That is my corner, okay? We don't do corners like this. We don't do corners like this. Okay, don't do that. You don't want corners that look like that. 3 points, 3 points for a corner. And if you do a transition from a corner into another corner, lead in, 1, 2, 3. This is now your lead in point, 2, 3. This is now your lead in point, 2, 3. Okay, that's how you make corners. If you need to make them sharper, you move them closer together. If you need to make them softer, you move them farther apart. If your corners need to be isolated from each other, so that means that you need to control this corner independently from this corner, you need one more point in between here. Okay? That would be this guy. This is your isolator. Right? So if I was going to build off of this, I would go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay? I always in almost every webinar I talk about this, because I want to make sure that especially folks who are new don't machine gun points in the corners. You do not need to do that. This is how you make a corner in NURBS. It's only 3 points. Okay. How did I make a rounded square? In the rounded square tool, there is a round option. Click that, drag it, place your distance, and then drag the corners to make it round. Okay. We also call that the iPhone 3 tool. Can you define a corner's radius to a precise measurement? Yes, you can. There's an option to do that. If you look in the command line when you do that, it'll ask you for the actual radius. All right, so if we look at my control points here, here's my corner, 1, 2, 3. Here's my next corner, 1, 2, 3. Here's my next corner, 1, 2, 3. Now, I can control this corner and this corner independently. This corner is associated with this corner because it shares that point. Does that make sense? But that's okay. I'm okay with that. All right, so let's mirror this curve. And then let's isolate these curves so that we can look at them by themselves. And if you notice, these overlap the center line. See that? So I'm going to match this curve from here to here. I'm going to average them, which means they're going to meet in the middle. I'm not going to join them right this minute. I am going to do it at tangency so that I know my center line tangency is clean. Okay, so now you see that it meets at the center. Now I have to figure out like what shape I want on the end of this thing, and I'm going to do that with a blend curve. And that lives under here. I always have to find it on the Mac every time I do this. Adjustable curve blend right here. And it gives me this dialog box with two handles on here. If I shift click and drag them, I can move them together, and that allows me to get a nice little blend there like that. Okay, and it's equal on both sides. Let me just say okay. So that gives me my approximate shape for what I want to do. I'm going to take all this stuff and join it. So now this is a closed curve, and we're going to look down here, say 3 curves joined into one closed curve. That's what you want. If it said 2 curves joined into one curve and an open curve and a this and a that, you got to go back and look and figure out what went wrong. All right, so let's show everything again. And you can see I kind of missed as far as my my surfaces are concerned. So I'm going to just scale this in 1D. And I'm going to start from back here, and I'm just going to pull this until it fits into my basic surface layout, right? Something like that. Now, if I look at this and I can say, well, if I project this straight down, is that going to do what I want, or do I want it to project at an angle? Well, let's see. Let's just project it once and take a look and see what's going on. I've never built this before, so I'm figuring out along the way just like you are. So pick this. We're going to project it onto that surface, and let's take a look and see how we did. And actually, it worked out really well. However, if I had projected it through the bottom one, it's going to give me a straight projection when really what I want is this kind of projection. So maybe what we should do instead is, well, let's go with it. Let's go with it. I'm changing my mind. So let's trim this. So that's our first surface. All right. Now we need to figure out, like, how do we get from this surface to this surface? And I think what I want to do is actually take this curve, and instead of extruding it straight down, see what happens like that? See how it gives me this head angle here that I don't like? Now, I can deal with that. Actually, let's deal with it. Let's do the simple thing. Let's do the simple thing. So let's drag this straight down. You're like, wow, you really don't rehearse these. No, I don't. I really do. I just make them up as I go along. And let's Shift, Command, click this resulting edge. Now watch this. If I drag this forward, look what happens. I can actually drag this forward, and it changes the angle of that. And that's awesome, right? Because it gives me this, which is kind of what I wanted. But look what it did to the back. I don't like that. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to Shift, Command, click, and then I'm going to scale 1D from here. And that leaves the back alone and lets me pull the front forward. See that? Which is really kind of what I wanted. Let's see how we did is in relationship to our angle. Actually, not too bad. Yeah, it needs to go a little more. Shift, Control, click. Scale 1 from here. Let's go a little farther. That's pretty good for government work. I'm going to say that that's pretty good. Now, this surface doesn't quite go far enough. So what do? Let's isolate. Everybody knows a lot about isolation right now, right? And we're going to turn the points on. And actually, this is an extrusion right now, so I'm actually going to explode it once. And that's going to turn it into a surface. In Rhino, there's extrusions and there's surfaces. When you just grab an object and extrude it, that's called a lightweight extrusion, and it has very limited control. If you want to turn it into a surface, you just explode it and it turns it back into a surface. There also is a command called use extrusions that I'm going to shut off. And I would rather have the planar extrusion output, instead of being extrusion, I would rather have it be a surface. So now when I extrude things, it's going to be a surface instead of an extrusion. So if you've run into that in the past, that's how to get rid of it. I'm going to just pull this back a little bit, turn the points on and pull it back a little bit. Let's turn it back on. So that now gives me enough surface to be able to work with. And I can then take this object and I can trim this object. And that gives me my bottom surface. Now, I could just trim and keep this surface and then do fillets, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually delete this. And I'm going to, instead of building and then filleting and all that nonsense, I'm going to blend surf. And I'm going to use blend surfaces, which live under here. They live. I always have to find everything new on the Mac, sorry. Blend surface right here. And I'm going to blend this surface and this surface together. And when I run it, you're going to see that it makes a really giant fat surface. But the cool thing is if I switch this to tangency, and then I click the lock and I drag this down, look what happens. It gives me this really nice little soft kind of 1970s blow molded kind of look, right? And I can even override these numbers if I want to go a little bit smaller and say 0.15. Should let me override it. Oh, not gonna let me override it. Interesting. I can override it on the PC. Interesting. All right. So that's all it's going to give me. Now, if we look down here, you can see that this is twisted a little bit. I'm going to add a shape right in this corner just to help straighten this thing out. And it's going to freak out, which is fine. I'm going to do the same thing here. And then I'm going to look and see where else it's freaking out. And it looks like it's doing okay everywhere else. I might actually add one right up here in the corner. And you can see that it's blown out my shapes. That's okay. Because once I'm done with this, adding the shapes, I'm just going to go and click in these two boxes again and drop it back to where it needs to be, just to refresh that. All right. So that gives me kind of this blow molded feel, right? And if we render this, it feels nice and soft and 70s-ish, right? All right. All right. Are you adding a curve? No, I'm actually adding a shape so that when you it's basically just another point of control for the blend curve, but it's all controlled with the sliders in the blend control box. So this is our basic chassis. I'm going to join that. Join it, not join. And that gives us our basic chassis. Now you can see that this has got like a little detail in here. So let's go ahead and throw that in. And we're going to just simply do that with a curve. I'm going to just draw this in here quickly. Something like that. And I may want to do this in Wireframe so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to copy and paste this using Option, something like that. And then I'm going to turn the points on and edit this lower one. I'll turn my grid snap off. Just to get the shape that I want. And again, I could use offset for this, but it's going to give me way too many points. So let's get a shape that's not terrible. That's better. Try not to designer fuss this too much, but there's only so much I can do when the curve needs to be fixed. Can't spend your whole life in this business and watch ugly curves go by, right? And if I was spending more time on this, or if I was doing it for a client or something like that, I would definitely really sweat this stuff. But hour and a half. Got to get this done in an hour and a half. It's like 5 o'clock, and it's like when somebody walks into your office at 4:45 on a Friday and says, "Can you knock this off before Monday?" That is the genesis of the 15-minute model, which I want you to be able to do. So I'm going to blend curve these two ends together so that I get a nice little blend at the end of that. And I don't have that set up in my pop-up, so I'm going to grab it from here. Nope. Grab it from here. Adjustable curve blend. And I'm going to just let it roll at tangency and say, okay. Like I said, if I was doing this for a client, or if I was doing this, we would fuss this stuff more, but we're going to kind of just let it roll. All right, so let's take this thing and split it. I'm going to split it with this curve, and the split tool lives down here. It has a very similar icon to the trim curve, or the trim icon. So I'm going to split this with this, and that is going to give me this piece right here. Now, if I were to just take this and scale it, right, it would only give me the ability to be able to make a straight line section in there. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to scale it slightly. And this is a bit of a cheat. Actually, you know what? I'm going to draw new curves because it's going to go faster. Because what I need to do is I actually need to make some space in here for a blend to happen. So sometimes you can get away with just scaling the little piece that you clipped out, but I'm actually gonna draw a new curve here. I'm gonna do it quickly. Got a lot of, this is a little bit of an ambitious build, so I'm trying to move as quickly as possible. Now I'm gonna trim this so that I get a gap, right? So I've modeled a gap in here. Trim with this curve, trim this object. And so now what I've done, if I go to shaded mode, is I've modeled a gap. And the gap then allows me to scale this out a little bit, right? And then I actually might go into the front view and turn the points on for this thing. I may actually grab that many points, and I might sneak this forward just a little bit like that, right? And this is an argument for keeping your models as light as possible. This is probably too many points up here. I probably should have done this a little bit cleaner, but we're going to get away with it. So I've actually made my little detail in there, which I can then put back together with a blend surface, like so. And I'm going to take this and drag it down fairly low value. And I'm going to add some shape. So before, when you asked if we were adding a curve, this is where we're going to add some shape. See how the isoparams are twisting a little bit? I'm just going to help it find its way, especially around the corners. It tends to get lost around the corners. Just add some shapes in there. And it looks like it's tracking well around the bottom here. Pretty okay there. A little bit flat there. I'm going to help it straighten out a little bit. And I'm just going to help it find its way around the corner. So anytime you see the isoparams twisting or getting crazy, you can override that and give Rhino a little help. See here how it's twisting? And it just straightens it right out. Let's go down here. I think this is probably okay, but yeah. See how it just affects that shape a little bit? All right, so I'm going to right click to accept that. I'm going to just wiggle these just a little bit to reset and recalculate that, and then take a look at it and see what it looks like. And in this case, I might actually add a little bit of blending here. There we go. And then say okay. Join it up. And if we look at this in rendered viewport, you can see that we have a nice little blended offset detail in there, right? And it's nice and soft going in and out. All right, so that's most of the chassis done. We have to add a few holes in here for the seat, but let's look at the seat itself and say and figure out how we're going to do this. So I'm going to do this with one curve that defines the front, one curve that defines the back. I'm going to extrude both of those surfaces straight up and then trim the overall shape and then put it together with a blend surface, basically like we did with the chassis here. So let's go to the top view. So some of these shapes, when you look at them, they can seem really complicated, but they're actually not. You know, if you break them down and you start thinking about this in a way that, you know, is kind of logical, that's kind of where we want to be. So there's my first curve. I'm going to mirror it at 0, and we can always use match if they don't line up perfectly. I'm going to go to wireframe. And then let's draw the front of our seat. And I want this to be a little softer. Mirror. I remember when I was getting started, and I was always looking at stuff, trying to figure out, like, how in the world am I going to make this? And it really, when you start looking at stuff and you start thinking about the tools that you have available, it doesn't have to be hard, right? You can start with the simple solution first. So in this case, I'm just scaling in 1D to get my base relationship. And then let's set these right on top of here using snap. If your gumball doesn't snap, by the way, there's a setting for gumball called Snappy Dragging, and it is set off of the bunny tail here. We want to set Snappy Dragging. That will make the gumball respect O snaps. So let's go to the front view and let's just extrude some stuff up. Let's just grab this guy and extrude it straight up. And in this case, like if we look at it, right, that's okay for the back. That's kind of what we wanted the back to do. But the front, we didn't really want the front to do that. So let's Shift Command click this edge. Let's just pull it back like that. And that gives us kind of our shape, right? And we can even do stuff like this, where if we turn on the points for this and we see that this is a degree 1 surface in this way, meaning it's only got 2 control points. What if we change its degree and we go degree 3 and degree 3? And now we've got 4 control points, which means that I can grab both of these and I can set my gumball, relocate gumball to here, actually, yeah, to here. And then I can pull this forward and snap it to that guy. And it gives me a little, actually, let's snap it to the bottom one. Let's snap it to here. There we go. And that gives us a little arc on the front of that, right? Now, it's not quite the right shape, and that's okay, but it's basically the right shape. So let's go to the right view. Let's isolate this. Let's go to the front view. And then let's figure out kind of what we want for a shape. And let's do this in Wireframe. And I kind of want the shape of this thing to kind of be something like this, right? And again, we're making this up. So a little trial and error is not going to kill us. Let's try and trim it. If we wanted to, we could project the curves and take a look at them, but I'm fairly confident that I'm going to get what I want. Not my first rodeo, so fairly comfortable. And that gives us kind of this as a basic seat. Now, what I don't like is I don't like this being dead flat, right? So instead of projecting from that direction, what if I project from the front to get a little bit better shape? And I'm going to have to do this in both views because as it sits right now, it's going to give me not the best results. So let's look at the points on this. These two are going to need to be lined up, and they are because there's no scale handle here in order to be able to get this tangent, but I don't like where the tangency is happening, so I'm going to slide this out a little bit. That gives me a little softer shape. I'm going to pull it up, and then this got a little flat on me, so I'm going to pull that in. Let's mirror this. And again, we're going to, we're finding the way along the way. So let's see what happens if we turn in this direction. I like that shape a lot better, right? So now how do I find the intersection between here and here? Well, there's a couple of things I could do. I could just copy and paste this, right? And point edit it, which I actually like as an option. So let's do that. Instead of clinging to this surface back here and saying, well, but I already made the surface, what do I do? I'm going to throw it away. I'm going to alt drag that. And then I'm going to grab this, Shift Command click, and I'm going to drag this backwards to about there. And you can see that it did some funky stuff with that, so that's not really ideal, right? So let's not do it Shift Control click. Let's turn on points. Let's isolate this. So let's turn on points and do it with points, because we've only got 4 points, right? So I can grab these points and I can slide them backwards like that. And this is why we keep the models light, right? I was talking about that before. We want to keep the models light so that we have the option to do this. If we make the models super complex, we don't have the option to do this because everything just gets crazy, right? We don't want that. So let's actually give this a little like that. All right, so let's bring everything back. Let's see how we're doing. Let's kill this guy. So that actually does about what I want it to do. Let's scale it out. Oops, just this guy. Scale him out a little bit. And I may even want to turn the points on for this. I may even want to pull like these points. I'm going to shift drag so that I get both of them. I may want to pull these forward and make this do what I want it to do, which is kind of mimic that shape. And then in the top view, it's a little bit pinchy right there. I want it to be a little wider, so I'm going to shift drag both of those. And then I'm going to scale it with Gumball just out a little bit. And then I may actually pull them all forward a little more. See how this is just, it's like pulling taffy. You can just make it do whatever you want, right? If the tools don't give you what you want, that's fine. Just make them do what you want. Would you use sweep as an option? I could, but it's more complicated. So let's do blend surface again. And I'm going to chain these edges. Oops. Let's try that again. And you can see that it does a very nice job of just dropping that right in there. And I'm going to just say, okay, call it a day. Okay, again, if I was doing this for a client, if I had a couple hours, I would really get into this, but we need a motor. And then let's see if I can cap it. And if I can cap it, then that closes off the bottom. But in this case, it won't cap, which means that there's something not quite planar. So I'm going to just make it planar by just drawing through here and hacking it off. Now it's planar. I can run cap. And you can see that that's now a closed object. So if we bring that back, we've got a seat and a chassis. I'm not going to worry about the mechanics on this just yet, but the optics need to be correct. So it does need to have these little adjustment holes in it. So I'm going to grab, make a copy, and then I'm going to mirror these. And then I'm going to grab these. And I'm going to just extrude them straight up. And I don't want them to go all the way through. I want them to go most of the way through. I'm going to cap these. And then I'm going to do a Boolean subtract in order of Boolean difference to make my holes. Okay, so there's the holes. I want to round those off, so I'm going to come down here and do blend edges. And that's probably too big, so I'm going to set all. And do a little bit softer version of that. All right, so let's go ahead and make our wheels. And we've got these wheels kind of built. I could do this with a revolve, so I think that's probably what I'm going to do. So let's isolate. And let's go to the front view like this. And then let's decide kind of what we want for a profile. So let's do this in Wireframe. I'm going to start at the midpoint of this thing. and come out here. Again, 3 points for a corner. And then I have to start deciding like what the shape is here. And I think there's going to be like a little rim detail. And it's going to come in. And then it actually cones out a little bit. And there's a little flat. Something like that. And then let's make sure, let's go to the top view and make sure that the curve didn't get all crazy. Because sometimes like if you do a curve, snapping to an object, it'll actually go crazy on you. And if it does, then you just simply grab the scale handle and scale to 0. Why do you need to close the object? I like to work in solid chunks. That way, if I want a data transfer or 3D print or something like that later, I don't have to go and fix the model. So I always try and work in watertight or closed chunks of a model. Does that make sense? So let's revolve this. Oops. Set my axis. Want a full circle. And there's my wheel. Get rid of the original surface. Mirror this guy. Oops. And ideally, you know, we'd put the axles and stuff like that in there, but I think we're probably not gonna make that. So let's do the front wheel. Same thing. Exact same way of doing it. And this guy has a little radius on it. And it actually comes in a little bit. And then it cones out towards the center line. And then has a flat. And again, you want to double check and make sure that your curve didn't get all wonky on me. In this case, it didn't, so we're good. Join it. Revolve. Trying to speed up just a little bit because I blabbed a little too long at the beginning. There's that. There's our wheels. So we're getting close, right? We just got to build forks and handlebars. Pedals. Okay, so we still got a ways to go. So let's do the forks. I'm going to do this with a shape from the front view. I'm going to draw what I want the fork to look like. I'm going to overbuild it a little bit. Mirror this. And I'm going to rotate this from the center. Nope, from here. I have a hotkey set up for rotate. Sorry if you missed that. And I'm going to set this to the same angle as our fork. And then I'm going to, this is a cool trick. So if I hit on the Mac, it is the control key first. I can, no, which one is it on the Mac? Command key. There it is. If I hit command first, I can rotate the gumball so that it lines up. And then I can extrude normal to the curve, and if I hold down shift, it goes both directions. And I'm going to pull it out the full width of my fork so that it gets what I want. Then I'm going to Command C, Command V, copy paste, and I'm going to shift drag to make the offset or the copy that I want. All right, so now I've got two surfaces. If I isolate, let's make sure I got both of them. So that's my basic shape of my fork, right? Do you usually create separate layers for each part? I usually actually get pretty far into the model and then start splitting it up. That's just kind of always the way that I've been doing it. If you're needing to be more precise, can you enter actual dimensions and angles, radius, etc.? Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, the one thing I didn't do is mark my center point on the wheel, so I'm going to do that. And let's do that in Wireframe so I can see what I'm doing. Actually, I do have a center point, so let's keep that. I'm going to keep that center point, keep this, isolate, and then I'm going to draw a circle to start with. And then I'm going to draw just some straight lines. Actually, I'm going to use the tangent from line, and that is tangent from curve. So I'm going to pick this curve. I'm going to start pulling like that. Do the same thing over here. I'm going to pull like this. And obviously, you know, again, if I was building this with more care, I would do so. And this gives me my forks. I'm going to trim both of these. And that gives me that shape, and we're going to put it together with, say it with me, class, blend surface. Blend surface is one of those tools that if it was a real tool in a real toolbox, it would have the paint worn off the handle. I'm just going to add a few shapes to untwist my isoprams. See how that kind of cleans that all up a little bit. And then I'm going to just wiggle these handles to recalculate it. Say okay. That's my handle and my fork. So now we need to just figure out what we're going to do with the pedals, and I'm going to do that from the left view. And I'm going to just draw from the center, come out, up. We'll go out about that far. And I'm going to set this right in the center of this wheel. That looks good. Now there's a tool called fillet corners, which is nice because you can fillet all the corners of a curve at one time. And let's do this at, I don't know, 1/4 inch. And it goes beep, 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 and it fillets all the corners. Can you give us an example of adding a precise angle? Yes, hang on just a second. Let's pipe this, and I'm going to pipe it with a round cap, so it's got a round end on it. And I wanted it to be the entire thing, so let's do that again. And let's do, there we go. And I'm going to mirror this. Actually, I'm going to build the pedal first. I'm going to just do that out of a simple block. And I'm going to do it from the, let's see, I want to do box, 1/4 height, but I want to do it from the center. And the center is going to be about right there. And it got a little big on me, so let's shrink it. Gumball as a modeling tool is really useful because it just, especially when you enable the O snaps, it becomes super useful. So let's snap it to the center of this. There we go. And let's just blend the edges of this thing off just so it softens a little bit. And then let's put a few details in it. I'm going to do rounded rectangles. And I'm going to, watch this, you'll love this. I'm going to just drag these and kind of eyeball it. See how the spacing on them is terrible? Watch this. Distribute. Distribute. We want the x-axis. And it goes and it fixes the spacing and makes all of those distribute correctly on the x-axis, which I can then grab all of this. So if you're like me and you're really lazy and you can't stand like spending the time to plan a proper array, you can just drag stuff out like that. Use distribute to straighten it out, and you're on your way. So I've just taken these and I've dragged them out with Gumball. I've extruded them, I've capped them, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to just stick it and do a Boolean difference. And there's that. That thing looks like enormous, so I'm going to just shrink it down. Something like that. And then let's take this entire thing and mirror it. And then we want to rotate it. '90, and I'm gonna relocate my gumball to the center point of here. And then I'm just gonna rotate it 90, or actually 180. Sorry, that would make a funny bike if it was only 90. This is now needs to flip 180, and there we've got our pedals set up. All right, we're cruising. How are we at? 10 o'clock. All right, I think we're going to come in under an hour and a half, which is great. So the last thing we need to do is figure out how to do the handlebars. And the handlebars are actually the most complicated part of this entire model because it's got this handlebar shape, and then it also has kind of a blend in with this center block. So let's make the center block first, and then we'll figure out how to deal with the the rest of the stuff later. So so the center block, I'm going to just do that with a rectangle. And let's start from the center, and then let's figure out about how big it's going to be. And then let's rotate it. And as far as precise rotating, if I click on this and I type like 40 degrees, it rotates 40 degrees. So if I type 32 degrees or 23 degrees, it rotates 23 degrees. So that's how you would do the precision as far as that if you wanted to get precise with it. But you know, in a hour-long webinar, precision is sacrificed for speed. So that's about where our block is going to go. I'm going to just go ahead and extrude that out for lack of a better plan to get something like that. Cap. And I kind of want this to be soft already, so I'm going to isolate that. And I'm going to blend the edges. And I want this to be a little bit bigger, so I'm going to do like 0.3. sorry, set all, 0.3. There we go. So that softens it up a little bit. And then I have to figure out kind of how I want to get my handlebars in here. So let's go to the left view and let's just draw them out. And let's say we want it to start kind of like this. And then we want them to start clicking over. And then let's go to the front view. And then we want them to kind of come back a little bit like that. And this is not, you know, this is not ideal. So let's flatten it actually. Let's just start with a flat curve and then we'll straighten it out later. And let's relocate the gumball again to here. And then let's just rotate this so it matches our approximate angle. And again, this is all ish, right? We're just kind of making this up as we go along. So let's turn the points on. Let's pull this back to get our handlebar grips kind of where we want them to be. That feels like that's too soft. So let's sharpen that a little bit. And I actually may want to add, it looks really tall. Let's shorten them a little bit. That feels a little better, huh? That's not terrible. So let's pipe this. Let's start down here. And let's come here like that. Let's add another one kind of like that. Let's add another one kind of right here. Let's see what that gets us. That's a little crazy. Let's clean this up a little bit. I think we can work with this. I'm going to explode it because it was a poly surface. And let's isolate it. And let's do edit, control points. Let's remove some knots. And I want to go the other direction. So I want to start removing, because I've got way too much detail in here. See how as I click these, they start to go away? And as I do this, the surface is going to start softening up. And then that gives us fewer control points to work with. And we can even do that some more. I think we can get away with some more. So control point, remove knot. I'm going to get rid of, see how that starts changing shape once we get enough of these out of here? And it becomes light enough. Oops, not that one. Not that one. So we need those three. And it becomes light enough that it becomes much easier to work with. See that? So now we've got a much simpler structure that we can start manipulating and getting a much better shape. Because again, the tools are only going to give you so much. That's why you can get into the points and really make it do what you want it to do. Does that make sense? All right, so let's see how this lines up. So this is probably worthless now, which is fine. So I'm not in love with this block. So let's mirror this just to see what it's going to look like. That's a little too blocky, isn't it? So let's do something different. Let's take and let's make our own shape. In fact, we might even want to steal a shape from up here so that it really relates. So let's do that. Let's grab an edge here, and then let's grab these two things and isolate that. And then what I might want to do is split this off or trim it off so that it's not too big. And then this thing is huge, so I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. And then let's do a blend curve to put the back together. And I'm kind of thinking about this, like what am I going to be pulling off here as I'm doing this? But I'm kind of just, instinct tells me that we're kind of heading in the right direction. So let's take this, and I watch this. I'm going to drag, then I'm going to hold down Command, and see how it starts. See these lines show up when I hold down Command? When I let go, now I've just extruded something in a different direction. So I like that as a relationship. Let's see how it looks with the bike. But it's way too big in this direction. So I'm going to Command rotate so that that is in the right direction. And then I'm going to shrink this. Oops, got to join it first. Command rotate. If I rotate Command, then I get a different thing. But if I Command rotate, that's what I get. Slide this forward. So that feels better. I'm going to slide these guys back a little bit so that they kind of land somewhere in there. And then let's go to the front view and say what kind of shape do we want coming in here like this. I'm going to try and do something like that. Drag, shift on the extrude dot. See how much modeling you can get done in Gumball? I just love that. Trim this stuff off. Join this up. Isolate, and then I want to blend off this edge. A lot of isoparams in here, but I'm not really concerned about that at this point. You know, if I was gonna get deeper into this model, I may wanna try and knock that down a little bit. Okay, so see how this blew apart? So let's try and blend edges again, and if it doesn't work, if it doesn't give us what we want, I'll show you how to force it. So let's preview this, and you can see that, see how it blows apart? I can use set all, and I can start backing up and say, well, what will fit in there? And the reason that it's failing is because I'm asking for too much of a radius with too small of a corner. So I can just keep backing up until I get what I want. And in that case, we're close. It's still not quite right. And in that case, it's almost right. It's still dying in that corner. That's way too much. I went the wrong way. 0.08. There we go. Now that completed. Now, is that really what I wanted? Let's see. I really wanted something softer around in there. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to isolate this. I'm going to go to the front view. I'm going to explode this. I'm going to get rid of that fillet that I just made, or that blend that I just made. And I'm going to build a gap. So I'm going to come in here and say, well, I want it to blend to about here. I'm going to trim this off. And then I'm going to go to the top view and say, I want this to be that kind of relationship. And ideally, you know, I should probably fix these corners. So I'm going to set this to this view, and then I'm going to go to my construction planes, and I'm going to set C plane to view. Where's my view one? Set C-plane view, C-plane view. There we go. Set C-plane to view. Boop. So now the C-plane is right in my view, and I'm going to do a rectangle center corner. I'm going to snap this here, make this rounded, bring it out like that. Now that's not really kind of the shape that I wanted, so maybe what I'll do is I'll just draw a curve instead. And I'm really hacking now, but that's okay. Mirror. I'm going to match these two. Average. Same thing again. Nope. There we go. Now I'm going to trim this. So now I've got this big gap, right? And now I can take this and use blend surface, and I can build a blend in here that does more of what I want it to do. That's much more of the shape, you know, that kind of blow molded kind of shape that I was looking for. So this is a really good way when if you're working in Rhino and it just is not giving you what you want, why not blend curves like before? I could certainly do that. I was kind of working at a skewed angle. I'm making a skewed angle with my hands that you can't see, but I was working at kind of a skewed angle, so it wasn't really coming together the way I wanted it to go. It's just Boolean these together. It went the wrong way, which means something needs to flip. So let's check. This one is the correct way. That one needs to flip. See how the arrows are going in? That's why the Boolean went backwards. There we go. And then we can do the same thing here, or we can actually do a cool trick called a pipe trim, and I'll show you that because I like it. This is a James Carruthers trick that I learned a million years ago. We'll do pipe, chain edges, and we're going to use pipe to build a gap, just like we did before. Something like this. See how that makes a nice shape around there? And if we go to wireframe, I can trim that gap. And then it gives me a nice opportunity to blend. It looks like this got a little tight, so I'm actually going to split this edge. I'm getting down into the details here. So I'm going to split this edge here, and I'm going to split this edge here, and then I'm going to use a blend curve to connect them back together. And then I'm going to trim this so that I get a little bit nicer corner here. And it looks like it doesn't like doing that in perspective view, so let's trim it here. There we go. See, I get a nicer corner there. Now when I blend surf this, I get a much nicer result. Add a few shapes to take out the twisting isoparams. And for those of you who are like, I just came from SolidWorks and this is making my head melt because there's no numbers. Yeah, that's one of the nice things about Rhino is you can work that way. You can work with numbers too, but in this case, we're throwing and going here. So I'm going to patch the end of this guy, and I'm going to use, I don't know, like 10, 10, preview it. I want to adjust my tangency, make a nice little bulgy end on that. If this joins, that's great. If not, that's great too, because we can always work around it. I'm going to go to my top view, cut this thing in half, because I already built one half of it, right? I don't want to build the other half. Trim, mirror, 0, join, and there is an hour and 18-minute long big wheel with some blabbing along the way. How do we do? Let's see. We didn't get the brake handle or the tassels in, so let's do the tassels because that's a really important design detail. Everybody's like, really? Really? The tassels make it, man. That's the difference between the 70s big wheel and the 90s big wheel. So there's a tassel. Let's pipe it. Smush it because tassels are flat. Make a few other ones. Explode them so that I can get access to the control points. Grab these control points and scale them. Grab these. Pull these out a little bit. They got to be different, right? Can't just leave them all the same. My longtime business partner, this is this guy named Kevin Pasco, and he and I have worked together for 20 years, and we got so nerdy about the details on stuff. Once he did this crazy construction truck for Matchbox that we did years ago, and if you zoomed in on it, anytime there was a nut or a bolt anywhere on the car, he had actually rotated the head of the bolt so that none of the bolts lined up correctly, lined up the same. And, he was kind of taunting me to see whether I would notice, and I did, and I commented on it, and he smiled and he said, "Yeah, well, you're going to do it. That's the thing that makes it feel real, as opposed to make it feel like a CAD model." So he did things like that, which was fun. So, anyways, that's what you do when you stare at a computer tube for 15 hours a day. All right, so there's our tassels. Let's poke them up into here. And if we're honoring Kevin, we would actually make these tassels different. So we cage edit them. That way the tassels don't match side to side. So that's not how it would be in real life. Select the curves. I would typically throw these on a layer, but I'm going to delete them for now. I'm going to save this model because I haven't done so. You can tell that I haven't saved it because it says Untitled. Once I name it, the Mac system takes over the saving. Could you maybe show us how to work a bit more using precise dimensions? Sure. So if you want to draw a curve with a specific length, click its start point, enter a number. That's how long that length is. So that's 10 units. If I want it to be straight, I hold down Shift. If I want to figure out how much longer I want the next unit, I can type in 15 and hit enter. That's how long this is, right? If I want to rotate something, I can pick the rotation, and then I can just enter an angle right here. So Rhino has the ability to enter numbers. It also has the ability for you to just run and gun like we're doing here. The only thing that we're missing here is this needs a fork tube because I can't stand that. So you can wing it if you want, which is necessary sometimes. You don't have to. Rhino definitely gives you the ability to be able to do work in both worlds. So, all right, so there's that. I'm going to hide this. And then let's throw a few materials on here and we'll just call it a day. So we're going to do plastic. I seem to remember these being these kind of like, it's like salmon orange color. Kind of like that. There's all these like weird kind of salmony colors. Let's do plastic. Make this black. Is my memory serving me? Am I remembering these colors right? Oops. Plastic. And I seem to remember the seat being like this weird, like kind of seafoam blue. And then the bars and the forks were yellow, if I remember correctly. But again, like this weird kind of like, not like what in yellow you would think of today. And then got the metal for the spindle. And then I think the pedals were blue, if I'm remembering correctly. Tassels, I think, were red, actually. Anybody remembering differently? How am I doing? Right. Firing up anybody's nostalgia here. Now the center on these things, the center with these had silver on them, but I'm not going to worry about breaking that up for right now. I just want to try and get something that we can take a peek at. Let's look at it. Rendered view. Is that about what we remember in the 70s? If the inside of the wheel was, say, gray, can you separate from the tire? Yeah, let's just go ahead and show that. So if I isolate this, typically if this was a poly surface, I could shift command click and do a sub-object selection, but I can't. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to split with an iso curve. And I'm going to come out here and I'm going to split it into two pieces. So now I can break this into two pieces and make this gray. It's kind of a darker gray if I remember. And that would be how you would break it up if you're doing two pieces. Oops, looks like I did the inside of that one. Let's do the outside. Split by ISO curve is a really useful tool, so it allows you to be able to break up stuff like that. And we do the same thing in the front. Now that I've seen it done like that, now I got to do the front because it looks cooler. That looks better. Hour and 28 minutes. Boom. How'd we do? Very cool. Hopefully that was, got to throw a lot of bag of tricks in there. And that got us a pretty cool result in an hour and a half. So, and because of the way that this model is put together, almost everything, if I do cell open poly surface, now the wheels are going to light up because we just split them. But the only thing that's open is the handlebars, and that's a simple matter of just throwing a cap on the bottom of this, which means that every single part of this we could throw through a printer right now. We don't have to do anything other than just cap off those handlebars. That's why somebody asked before, like, why did I close off the bottom of the seat? That's why, so that we can at the end I can just go print, or I can send it to SolidWorks, or I can send it to an engineer. We can do whatever we need to do, instead of having to go back and say, oh, this is open, that's open, this has an edge, that has an edge, this has a hole, that has a hole. I always do that along the way. So like every time I build a part, I'll make sure that the part is closed and then move on. And not always, but 99% of the time that's the way that I do it, so that I don't have to go back and fix stuff later. All right. Any questions? If not, we are going to nail it at an hour and a half. And are there other more introductory level courses? Yes, if you go to our YouTube page, which is here, let me find it, which is where this will be posted and all of our other stuff. So Rhinoceros 3D is our stuff. There's all sorts of new, like this radio was a little simpler, but all of the getting started with Rhino stuff is going to be here. Okay, and just so you know, just because they're in Windows, getting started for Windows, here's the getting started for Macs. Like this water bottle one is super simple if you want to get started, but you're going to move from this to big wheels pretty quickly. So so that's where it's going to go. We also have a Vimeo channel, by the way, which is here, and that has all of the same stuff on it, but in Vimeo format. So like this chip clip, much simpler model, not as fun, but it's much simpler. So this radio, also very simple, even though it came out looking pretty complex. It's a pretty simple model. So there's a lot of other stuff that you can take a look at in there. All right, so this is, let me put this in the chat so that you can have it. There's that. And then our YouTube is back here. That's where all this stuff is going to land. All right. Any other questions before we call it? If not, I will let you go. Thank you very much for going with me on this journey. Was pretty confident most of the way, but you never know. I think the result ended up coming out all right. Any other questions before we roll? If not, I'll let you go and say thanks for joining. All right, great. Well, thanks for joining me today. As I said before, my name's Kyle Houchins. I'm a tech and a trainer for McNeil. I also own a small consultancy called The Outside Digital Art and Design if you're interested in checking out some non-McNeil stuff, but it's all built with Rhino anyway, so let's be honest, it's all kind of McNeil stuff. We do these about once a month. The next one I will do will be for Windows. We kind of alternate Windows, Mac, so the next one will be for Windows. And we usually announce them on the web, on the forum. But if not, if you want to find out where this stuff is and get on the mailing list or whatever, If you go to the Learn tab, go On-Demand Classes. Oops, sorry, Live Classes. Rhino Live right here. This is where you can register for this stuff, and you can register for them like a month or two in advance. So this is where you would find that. So let me give you that. And with that, I will leave you. This was Getting Started Rhino for Mac. I'm Kyle Houchins. Go make great stuff. Thanks, everybody. Bye.